Welcome back. Now, South African poet, educator, mother and activist Barbara Masekela recently opened up and details some of her life experiences and journey in a memoir titled Poli Poli. This offering, Masekela shares a remarkable history that speaks to African identity, close family bonds, belonging, struggle and sacrifice, women's rights and femininity. For more on this extraordinary South African tale that highlights tales of lesser-known social history of people, families, communities and places, my colleague Ikgomotseng Segopolo sat down with her. Take a look.
Just tell us about Poli Poli and why you decided to share your story through this book.
I've been always interested in writing, and I've been writing for a long time. I have some published poems, and I taught writing and literature. So it's in my, it's in my writing is part of me. But also, I've always wanted to write in fiction, actually. I would rather write a novel than this. But I thought I should write a memoir. It's almost the end of my life. I'm 80 years old, and I've had all these experiences, and I was driven to write this book. And all my family always wanted me to write. I had hoped that I would publish this book while my brother was alive, because he was always very much encouraging me to write. And I guess in a way, this book is homage to my brother because it talks about our childhood. My brother, being 2 years older than me, was always a model for me. So, but he was a musician and I am a writer, and our books are very, very different because his is more of an autobiography, but mine is more of a social history and the memories of growing up and the people around me, the places, the country, So, mine is much more, I think, of a memory of a wider group of people rather than focused on myself alone, because I just couldn't do that. I couldn't write an autobiography because I found it very dry, to focus on my life. And I realized as I was writing too that my grandmother, with whom I spent the first 10 years of my life, Oma, was the greatest influence on my life. And I was driven by the fact that I wanted to memorialize her.
In the opening chapter of the book, you describe your childhood growing up in KwaGuqa. Just share with us some of the memories you remember.
When you read about these small towns, you don't read about people. You read about coal or diamonds or gold. That's what you read about, but you don't read about the people who were most affected and dispossessed and displaced and lost a lot, So my book is an attempt to bring that life and those people alive. And one of the childhood experiences I remember very graphically is the raids by policemen coming, and if they found anything, just pouring it out and throwing out things, but mostly wanting to arrest these old women.
And you say that your Oma, Johanna, inspired you to write this book. And you say this book is also an ode to all the grandmothers that survived South African war unsung.
We all come from one chain, of generations. And I felt that sometimes we are so focused on our apartheid pain that we seem to forget that there was a generation which made it possible for us to be here, that went through the Boer War, that went through the Land Act, that had no voice, not a voice as much as, because we put out our voice. We were a different generation. We were not negotiating, but we were demanding freedom, and so on and so forth. So I thought that it was important that we remember that we are here because of people like our grandmothers, your great-grandmothers, who had to endure suffering, who had to endure pain that we can't compare pain and say this is worse than the other, but they survived and they brought forth, and we were, because of them, and we were able to achieve the freedom that we did because they reared us in that manner that made it possible for us to be strong and assertive.
Tell us about your relationship with your siblings growing up.
Well, my brother and I were 2 years apart. I'm 6 years older than the sister who follows me, and my baby sister passed away many years ago. Yeah, so they're much younger than us. So Hugh and I, naturally, because we were 2 years apart, we're very close. And that persisted to the end of his life. I always, we were close. We wrote letters to each other. We called each other through the years in exile. I went to live in America. I lived on the East Coast in New York. He lived in Los Angeles. But we were always close to each other. Then he moved here. In fact, when the last 3 years of his life, he lived across the street from me. So we're very close.
And what do you think Bra Hugh, or Minky, as you used to call him, would think of Poli Poli?
I think he would be so proud of my book. I think he would be so happy. And as I've said before in other fora, I've said that my brother, being the older one, always led, and he was the star, even from childhood. Everything he did, everybody was saying, oh, Hugh this, oh, Hugh Minky this, Minky this. And I say that if my brother were alive, he would be so proud of my book that he would pretend that he would act like he had written it. But also my brother did very extravagant things. He never brought me a bunch of flowers, but he would bring me a box full of and not only me, he was very generous in that way. And I think that if he were alive, he would have bought all the books, and they would have had to print more because he would buy them and give them away to everybody. He would be so proud.
And just lastly, we haven't touched on your mother, but you're going to read us something about her.
Yeah, I haven't touched much, even in the book. I don't say much about my mother. And I will in the sequel to this. Yeah. But my mother was the heart of my family. And she was a wonderful, wonderful person. It was heart-wrenching to part with my parents again. Your father thinks it's best for you, Mama said, as I sat between her knees, my legs outstretched on the kitchen floor. The pots were cooking. She sat on the round wooden footstool my father had carved for her, dressing my hair, parting it in the middle and pulling the comb through it. Unlike hers, my hair shrunk like wool when it had been washed, and it had to be coaxed with pomade to separate the kinks. It was an ordeal to put the comb through it, and it had to be braided while it was still damp. At times the braids were so tight that even smiling was difficult for a few days afterwards, and the skin at the roots around the partings got inflamed. Still, it was special. It was a special ritual, this unraveling, this painful ride to smooth out what was rough, to flatten what was uneven. We were facing the same way, and she had to bow her head a bit and hold my head still between her legs to stop me from wriggling. I could not see her face, but I knew it by heart, and it was drawn there in fervent shades of a felt devotion. Those lines around her worried brow, the measured impatience from broken promises, and the sheer weight of not being able to shape the path ahead were all in my mind portrait of my mother. That is what I took with me to Inanda. Sometimes in the many years of exile, in Ghana, in Zambia, in London, and in the US, I would laugh out loud and hear the tinkle of the notes of my mother's mirth in my own.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And what does this particular section in the book mean to you?
It means everything. It means that my mother is inside of me. And it means for all of us, we have that. We are not just individuals, going around, but we have inside us a community of people who have raised us and who have influenced our lives. And I think for me it also means that when we must always conduct ourselves not as individuals, but conduct ourselves as individuals who are a product of, many, many other people.
Mama, thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Mm-hmm.